we'll kick it off to Patrick. And Patrick, thank you again, and we look forward to your discussion today.
Great, thank you, and thank you everybody for joining today. So looking forward to a nice talk here, and I think the title is a little provocative, but I think hopefully you'll find that there are some interesting questions that are really raised when you look at the nature of the malware that we're seeing and its relation to kind of how and when things get inspected and how we defend against them. So obviously everybody's heard about Target, and probably everybody's sick of hearing about Target. The fact is that there are breaches happening constantly. There was an article yesterday that kind of hit the highlights, or rather the lowlights of just the year so far. And what we found was that obviously these data breaches are happening all the time. And interestingly, phishing really is behind many of them, a shocking number of them. And so when you look at the challenge a lot of organizations face, we find that really email security and phishing in particular really is still in many ways the #1 challenge. We conducted our own research last year because I know organizations have actually been have invested a lot of effort in training users, not to click on links, not to open emails, not to even forward emails from people they don't know, to open attachments from people that they haven't requested. But the challenge is that our own research found out last year, and this was echoed by the recent Verizon, the findings in the Verizon data breach investigations report, is that at the end of the day, there's a great quote from them: users will be phished, and they will eventually click. And so phishing emails remain the vector of choice for a lot of attackers, especially for state-sponsored and organized crime, because it's scalable, it's flexible, and it's very effective. We'll talk about some of the things that make it so effective in the next few slides. At the same time, the volume is just really going through the roof. So we see an amazing amount of spam that's malicious. We're looking at new ways of talking about the kind of spam. Spam is in many ways a solved problem, but you're seeing spam in some cases becoming what we call mal spam, almost a precursor to phishing campaigns or phishing attacks. And so the volume is increasing, and it's really beginning to overwhelm a lot of the users' existing systems. And the fact, once again, is that there are actually formula ratios for the right amount of spam to send into a phishing email to send into a target organization, or that can hit an organization and have a high degree of clicking, high degree of success and effectiveness in clicking. When we look at where phishing fits into the overall threat landscape and the sort of the range of different types of phishing attacks, we actually see there's really a spectrum. It's not the attackers can choose from. And if you think at one end you have the sort of highly targeted attacks, we call spear phishing attacks. At the other end you have what we've coined called longlining attacks, which are sort of high volume phishing campaigns that aren't really targeted particularly, that are often targeted at organizations or sectors or industries rather than specific users in individual companies, and then with a range of points along the way in between them for different kinds of campaigns that offer different degrees of flexibility, targeting, volume, etc. We find spear phishing is obviously some of the best known examples. Everyone knows about the spear phishing attack that hit RSA years ago that ultimately led to the compromise of the secure ID tokens. That was a single email sent to someone in there. I believe it was their HR department. It was a malicious XLS file. And in our own analyses, we see spear phishing attacks pretty frequently. They tend to go to one organization, and typically it's in this case we had one organization sent an email sent to one user in one single organization. The URL was actually really cleverly done. This was unusual in that it actually used a malicious URL rather than a malicious attachment. And the URL was designed to seem legitimate. We see a lot of interesting techniques where the attackers, we've trained users to hover over to look and see what the URL looks like. Well, we've seen cases where the URLs, the first 56 characters in the hover over actually look fine, but then there will be 119 spaces followed by the actual rest of the URL that links to a malicious page. And that doesn't show up to the user when they hover over, so the user clicks on it and ends up, once again, going to a site that downloads malware automatically. The site itself, link, in these cases, the site was designed to link to a web page that could actually deliver malware automatically as a drive-by download, and it was pretty customized malware for that purpose. It was something that was not really commonly seen. not one of the more common frequent exploit kits like a Fiesta, for example. At the same time, you see watering hole attacks, and there's been an interesting divergence in what we even call watering hole attacks. So Verizon had the term, which I've seen before, is the strategic web compromise. And these are typically targeted watering hole attacks, where an attacker will actually look at specific verticals, specific organizations within a vertical and within an industry, and then seek out websites that are often frequented by users in that site, and will then try and compromise one of those sites. And then wait for someone to come, wait for a user to visit. And so we actually saw a good example of this with an aviation industry website that had an aviation industry related website that had their URL compromised. And what we found was that that email actually is a factor in these. So even though the phishers don't send out emails, the users have actually often signed up for emails, subscribe to emails for updates, announcements, et cetera, for legitimate purposes. So in this case, your users actually received legitimate emails related to these sites with links that led to, in this case, a malicious site. And obviously, it was targeting users within a specific within the aerospace industry. So what we were able to determine based on our analysis was that this was, once again, more customized malware. And that's often the differentiating characteristic between a watering hole or a strategic compromise and something that's a little more garden variety, drive-by web, a web-based compromise, is that they'll actually is the exploit kit one, maybe is typically a little less common, a little more tailored to that specific industry. And once again, in this case, it targeted a Java vulnerability. Longlining, however, is something that we've seen that has really risen in the last. We've classified in the last year or so, and what we see with longlining campaigns is it's like in phishing. In phishing, the whole idea of longlining is you have these phishing lines that are as much as a mile long, and they may have 2,000 hooks on them, and you drag them behind the boat, and they may catch hundreds of different kinds of fish. And so then when you pull it up, you see what you've got. And this is, in all likelihood, the kind of compromise that was the kind of campaign that was actually used to catch that they caught the HVAC defender, who then led to the target compromise. And so typically you get very, very high volumes of emails that are actually messages that are sent over, in some cases, bursted out over a period of hours. And in this, there's a technique of rotating URLs, IP addresses, subject lines, so that you get a high variety, a high degree of variability or variation between the individual emails, so that you may send 500,000 emails, but there are very few that actually look the same, and so they're often able to avoid spam filters and even phishing filters that are based on traditional reputation detection methods, because no email was seen more than once or twice. And so in this case, we actually saw some interesting longlining campaigns that occurred after the Boston Marathon bombing and the fertilizer plant explosion in Texas, which happened really, if you recall, within the space of the same week. And we actually saw thousands of messages sent out with, once again, a large number of unique IP addresses over a lot of as you can see, almost 56 different domains. And so, once again, this heavy cycling of attributes allowed them to get a wide range of fair degree of penetration. And we found was that it had the Red Kit exploit kit and had Java exploits, and typically it had low rates of detection among the existing AV engines. That's another thing we find is that a lot of these, when they first come out, they'll use a form of executable packing or other obfuscation methods that allow them to evade detection by the AV engines. Typically for only a period of about two or 3 days. After that, the AV engines kind of catch up, and catch rates jump up to 50 or even 75%. So they have a window of 2 or 3 days where they're typically most likely to be effective, and it typically ran from the Kelio spot. And what we found was that not only were the volumes incredible, you can see actually the amount, so the email volumes really spiked, and so over the period of about a week. And the number of messages that were actually seen, but also we found that when you actually look at the malware that was delivered by these sites, that the users couldn't tell. As you saw, when you looked at when the user clicked on the link that took them to the page of the video would run, take a second while it loads, and then it would actually show them the video. so they got what they clicked for, but at the same time, they also were at the same time infected with malware that was completely transparent and invisible, unbeknownst to the user. So that's always another characteristic that we see, is that we often train our users to look for suspicious things and also to look to see if to be aware of if their machine is acting strangely or if they go to a page that seems malicious. But a lot of times users can't tell. At the same time, behind these pages, there's a lot of sophistication. So, we think about this as often spam, but the fact is that, there's a high, spam is a solved problem. There's a high degree of sophistication in these campaigns, especially in these long-lining campaigns. You have everything from traffic distribution systems that enable them to filter for specific kinds of systems, specific browsers, specific URLs, domains, geos even, and direct machines to direct clients to, in some cases, just a regular spam web page, and others to a web page that's downloading an exploit kit. We saw one where recently customers were questioning why we were flagging something as malicious. Because it seemed like it was just a regular spam page. When we looked, we actually realized that the TDS was directing PCs and Macs to just a regular spam, a weight loss spam page. But when if a user clicked on that link and hit the page with an Android device, then they actually were directed to a page that downloaded an Android exploit kit. So these can be very sophisticated and very targeted, and they don't just go after they don't just go after PCs and Macs. They actually are using this to even target mobile devices as well. So as a result, we've seen the rise of a category of solutions in the industry that we often called advanced threat detection, and these are now considered must-have technologies by most organizations. If I asked a customer 3 years ago if they were looking at this technology, they said that it was often something that either it wasn't a challenge for them, or the technology was just not really essential to their environment. But now really everybody is really considering this kind of capability a must-have for their environment. And for most folks that I talk with, this means sandboxing. So when we say sandbox, they really think of a virtualized environment in which you can actually unpack a piece of malware. And so, when we look at sandboxing, it's helping understand, what we really mean by sandboxing. So it's pretty straightforward. When you get, in the case of email, for example, maybe if you have an attachment in an email, you can look at a piece of malware. When the email is received, you will analyze it, determine if it's clean. If there's no attachment, it's passed on. If there is an attachment, it can actually pass up to some kind of attachment filter. So it will look to see, for example, does it match up against known AV signatures and other attributes, and it can be automatically dropped. The attachment can be dropped or quarantined if it's malicious. However, if you see something and the hashes are good, then it can be automatic. It can be passed by. So, however, what happens when you see a piece of an attachment that you've never seen before? So you don't have a hash for it. You don't know if it's good or bad. You send it to the sandbox, and the sandbox can dynamically analyze it by basically by opening it and running it in a virtual desktop environment to see how it behaves, what processes does it start, what files does it drop, does it call out to any URLs, etc. And so if it's good or bad, we can then actually determine, is it malicious or not, and if it's good, pass it, and if it's bad, you can block it. So that's sandboxing in a nutshell. It's challenge. It works well for attachments. You do run into some challenges with the web, and often what we see is that for web stuff, you have another process called URL sandboxing. And so in the case of URL sandboxing, it's a very similar approach. For example, say you get an email that comes in, Mail Gateway sends it up to typically some kind of URL analysis, URL repository that will look and see if it's known. If it's known good, if it's known bad, it's blocked. If it's known good, it's allowed on. But interestingly, though, what happens then when a user clicks that URL? So if they say they click that URL 2 or 3 days later, you don't really have a sense of what's going to happen there for a number of reasons. Another challenge is that this is really difficult to do for every request in every email, and especially whether it's through the web or via web pages. And so one of the challenges you see with URL sandboxing in particular is it really only works for the now. That is, for web URLs that are good when they come out. And attackers are often looking, asking themselves, should we use a URL or should we use an attachment? Attachments are typically more likely to evade AV detection. They have their own advantages. They typically have limited exposure because you can send, you can send them to very specific organizations. They can be highly targeted. If you target them to one or two users or one or two organizations, the odds of them actually getting detected and then sent up to VirusTotal and the larger AV networks is reduced. You can have very flexible payloads. That's where you often, when you see some true 0 days, they're more often in attachments, and they can be, once again, very targeted. URLs have the advantage of being much more scalable, very high volume. So they work really well in these long-lining campaigns, or even in the watering hole attacks, watering hole campaigns. They're very good for spam filter evasion because, once again, you can recombine URLs and IP addresses and subject lines to create, an almost infinite variability of variation of individual emails or individual messages. It's very good at evading spam. They can be much more effective, and they're delayable, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment. And I think what you find is that users are much more likely, despite all the training, users are much more likely to click to visit a link, to click a link in an email. So when we talk about why are URLs more effective and why in many cases are you seeing more attackers actually relying on them, especially for the broader-based campaigns, because as Verizon said in their own research, 18% of users will visit a link in a phishing email. So it seems much less threatening to click that link than to actually open an attachment. So how do a lot of these fish avoid detection? So typically, once again, in the case of spear phishing, you may have very low volume. They're handcrafted. They're very tailored, very customized to specific environment. They often are, they may rely on a legitimate email of some kind. So once again, watering hole attacks and some of these newer new generation of web campaigns that we see rely on compromising websites and then relying on users who receive updates and legitimate emails to actually lead them to those sites. The advantage, though, is that we can actually detect and stop users from visiting those sites, even when they weren't targeted, just by virtue of that legitimate email. But then the interesting one is, what if there's nothing to detect? So when you receive that URL, you receive the email with the URL, and at the time of delivery, there's no URL on that web page. The page is clean. It has no bad reputation. It's a perfectly legitimate site. We've even seen cases where sites that actually had a fairly good, fairly high page ranking actually, were compromised as after these campaigns. So it's not even that they're always random little-known sites. And then once again, the TDS systems, a lot of these traffic distribution systems often work very well to redirect or to obfuscate and redirect some of the requests and some of the attempts to look and see if there's malware on the page by preventing, by forcing a user to, basically forcing the system to go through 2 or 3 levels before it actually tries to download malware. And once again, the URLs are really the challenge. And so, this challenge of how do you detect an attack that how do you detect malware? How do you detect that a URL is malicious? After it's already passed your gateway is a major challenge, because in many ways that's really the blind spot of a lot of URL sandboxing. And as we see, URL sandboxing is really becoming essential to stopping a lot of the threats that are out there. And the problem then is that URLs can go bad. So we have, when you do a lot of your analysis, your inbound analysis, you have the known bad. So whether it's blacklisting, virus, AV signatures, known spam filter, known spam, and also IP address blacklists and IP address filters, those are often relatively easy to detect and stop, and it's typically using reputation signature-based defenses. The challenges that you see then are with the not yet bad. Again, the things that are going to be bad in the future, but that aren't bad today, because the IP addresses may be good, or they just haven't been determined to be bad yet. The URLs once again are new, or they're from domains that were domains that don't have a bad reputation yet. Once again, AV files that don't have an AV signature, and also the challenge of URLs URLs and files and content that are actually that are legitimate, that are clean when they come through. And so this is where malware sandboxing can help, but once again, the idea is, the challenge is that you have to understand how to identify this malware, these campaigns, as they become bad. So what we find here is that, and here's a good example. I call it pulsing. So when you get what we've seen is that these longlining and malware campaigns will begin. The campaign's launched, and the emails are actually sent out. And they monitor, and so the attackers will actually monitor the return email, the return messages for basically delivery status to find out if they're passing through the gateway. So the web page that whole time is good. Malware hasn't been uploaded. Email is clean. Everything is legitimate. But then, as once they have confirmation that the emails are getting through, they're actually in the user's inbox. Then you'll actually find that the malware will be uploaded to the web page, and at that point, the email is in the user's inbox. The email is in the user's inbox. It's passed your gateway. It's past the point where most organizations have a chance to actually detect and stop it. And at the same time, now the links in those emails are actually now going to carry them to malicious websites. So how do we deal with this problem? So what we find is that really the way to handle this is actually through big data analysis, because you have to be able to see you need a process of constant analysis of email data across many organizations with a correlation process that can identify campaigns and that can dynamically change how these emails and URLs are handled, not only when they're received, but also after they're received. And so, with a process that actually that looks at not just message data, but also URLs, and compares it to compares to timing, location, geography, sender, recipient, et cetera, can actually correlate all that information. And once again, has to work with billions of email addresses, of email messages a week. So in our case, we see 6 billion emails a week. And that's the kind of volume that you need to actually be able to proactively rather than reactively take action against these URLs, these malicious emails before the users actually ever even click on them. What we find is that velocity tracking is really critical. So once again, you have to be able to see a very high volume of email messages for us to even begin to do this kind of analysis. But then using using big data views to actually break down and understand behaviors, essentially baselining and understanding behavioral patterns, not just for an individual company or for an individual network, but for essentially dozens and hundreds of organizations, thousands of organizations really, to understand what emails are being sent from who, when, and how, so that you can actually dynamically adjust not only spam rules, but also throttling, blocking, and routing for other messages, and then have the ability to dynamically identify a campaign as it actually occurs. And so, ultimately, it becomes this idea of how do you stop botnet campaigns and block high-volume messages with similar content. So these campaigns are often emerging. They may come out. You'll find that there are one or two emails that hit organizations first, and then they're often followed by a burst and then a wave. And so the trick is to actually identify them as early as possible in that process. So we actually had one case of a campaign that we detected where a single user at a large financial organization received an email that linked them to a news site for investors. That one email was delivered. We rewrote the email, of course, during the process, and at the same time, we keep track of all these by hashes and records. And so our predictive analysis actually then correlated the URL for the site in emails that were received a little while later across multiple organizations. And as a result, we then decided to sandbox the URL, because once again, it's really not practical for performance reasons to sandbox a URL every time for every email that comes in and every time a user goes to it. So the trick is then how do you determine which one's the sandbox? So here the predictive analysis allows us to actually then identify a campaign as it's emerging and say, hey, these all actually share this one URL, or that they share this single attribute. So then we will dynamically, in this case, we dynamically sandboxed the URL and found malware. It was actually the infection chain led to a magnitude exploit kit that typically drops crypto defense and Ramdo. Ramdo is a click fraud bot that happens to also disable a lot of antivirus engines, and so can cause quite a bit of mischief. And at the same time, as a result, we quarantine the URL so that now, in that case, if the user did click that email, it clicked the URL and that email address, we would actually been able to detect and block it. So once again, this is a great example of using that predictive analysis with a lot of big data analytics to actually identify URLs that have become malicious after they have been received, and then you turn that into protection that can actually stop a user from getting infected. Once again, the idea is, how do you, in some ways, how do you offer that protection in the future after you've initially inspected an email and led it through the gateway. So as a result of this kind of capability, you get the ability to spot campaigns as they're emerging, which has a lot of actually beneficial effects for organizations. On the one hand, it improves your spam filtering and your spam and phishing filtering, so that a lot of these messages don't even get through to later organizations. At the same time, it also helps administrators by identifying that certain emails or certain malwares related to a specific campaign. They can actually create more uniform and really operationalized and automated response processes, so that you can deal with every system that might have been infected in a campaign the same way in a very rapid fashion. So it really enables a much more streamlined incident response process. And again, the only way to do this is with a global view of billions of email messages, and then that allows you to predictively identify malicious URLs and block URL-based campaigns. So as a result, going back to what URL sandboxing looks like with something like Predictive Defense, you have the ability then, email comes in and it has a URL. The URL is identified as URL is identified. We don't really know what it is. It seems good at the time. User tries to click it, but when Predictive Defense has identified that the URL is actually malicious, when that user clicks the URL 2 days, a week, 3 weeks, our research finds that 7% of users click URLs a month after they've been received. So really, anytime after it's been received, you can actually block that dynamically and protect the system from being infected. At the same time, it also lowers the overall volume of potentially malicious emails that even get through. So, for example, we had a recent campaign where this kind of analysis enabled us to show a big difference between the amount of emails that were received before Predictive Defense analysis and then after. So, with Predictive Defense enabled, you have a fairly high degree of messages delivered out of a total campaign, whereas after, you get a very, very low number of overall messages out of the overall that get through. And there always will be something that gets through, which is why then you have to have that predictive analysis, because as you said, something will get through. And so the way you handle those typically is with a URL, what we call a URL rewriting. It's something that multiple solutions use. Proofpoint has it, but obviously it's something that others do as well. But with that capability, URL rewriting typically allows a solution to then track that click, so that when a user clicks on it, you can actually block a user from visiting that particular page that has been determined after the fact to be malicious. So to conclude, then, what's really required for today is, we have conventional threats that are often detectable with blacklist and signature-based mechanisms, reputation-based mechanisms. For advanced threats, you have the need for these highly targeted threats. You have to actually have the ability to provide protection at the time of click for emailed URLs, not just when the URLs are received as part of an email. And then protection that can follow users across different devices. Almost nobody that I can think of, that I know of, only works from their company laptop or their company computer anymore. They're often working from their smartphone, their tablet, maybe even their personal Mac or other computer. So being able to provide protection that follows user across different systems is really critical as well. And then at the same time can defeat Many of the malware and credential seeking attacks in these campaigns that you see targeting a large number of organizations that can have very big effects. And at the same time providing intelligence about what responses to provide. So for those users who do, for those few that get through, when you block them, and also provide tracking so you can identify the systems and provide guidance for remediation after. And then, as always, as I said, the most important thing is having that ability, having that big data visibility, that big data and cloud-based visibility that allows you to identify identify campaigns, identify threats from large volumes of emails and large volumes of messages, and provide the protection that inspection at the moment of that an email is received can often miss. So then, ultimately, the full solution that would look like a next-generation protection solution with really multi-layer capabilities and a full life cycle. That can provide a combination of predictive capabilities, advanced malware detection using sandboxing, obviously, combined then with also really an integrated insight and response solution capabilities so that you can understand not only what's happening in your environment, but also how to respond more effectively to it. At Proofpoint, we obviously are we're a provider of cloud-based solutions, the industry leader in areas from messaging security to advanced threat defense, archiving and governance, and email encryption and privacy. And we have just been we were just named a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for the I believe eighth year in a row. Yes, so 6th Magic Quadrant, 8th year in a row. Very proud of that. And happy to be working with iSecure. And so we obviously have the ability, if you want to see how this works for yourself, you have the ability to try this out as proof of concepts. Just work with with iSecure and then Proofpoint. So with that, thank you for your time today, and we'll open the floor to questions. I guess submit your questions via the chat. Paul read them out, and then we'll do what we can to answer them.
Great, excellent. Excellent. And I do have a question here that just came in real quickly. Some organizations have allowed spam courtesy, meaning that they ask the user to select spam after initial filtering. Does your tool do this? If so, briefly describe how it's managed and what are your thoughts on it?
So yeah, so Proofpoint Enterprise Protection is our overall messaging security and anti-spam solution. And yeah, there are a lot of flexible controls that allow you can do generally you use rules called dispositions that enable you to decide how aggressively you want to filter spam. We have recommended levels, obviously, but we do find that some organizations actually choose a lower level, or will choose a lower level of filtering, and then based on so essentially there's a score, and so organizations will choose a lower threshold for what they allow, so that users will see more emails, and then they can actually report individual emails as spam through the system. And so there's actually an integrated sort of button or capability within the console that lets you do that.
Great, excellent. I think you hit that one. Another question that we have here is that I'll kind of tee this up for you, Patrick. It seems like we were talking a lot about the future and how we have to future-proof ourselves here. From a phishing perspective, it's the sophistications of attacks have gone down the line of where was spam, and now you talked about the Longlining and the water holing and things like that. Have you at Proofpoint seen any kind of like a 3.0 version of phishing attacks that could be coming down the line that we might not be thinking of at this point, that maybe in the next 3 to 6 months we might be seeing in the news or mainstream media?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's actually in some ways there's actually two parts to that question. The first one, and actually the whole concept of the future, and I'm always really wary of kind of talking like I intentionally avoid the term future-proof, because a lot of folks, especially vendors, will often use that to talk about how you can buy a solution today and essentially save yourself from future threats, future changes, future challenges. And I think that's a different sort of idea, then here we're really looking at how malware itself actually leverages the temporality of most malware inspection, of most malware gateways to actually basically exploits the fact that most malware gateways rely on looking at something when it's received, and so by becoming bad, after it's been received, it can in some ways you can use the future, the fact that the time after that initial inspection to become more effective. So then, in that regard, though, as far as like a 3.0, we're seeing some interesting trends. I think something that we're gonna do more, we're looking at. You're going to see more from us on is there's been some interesting trends in spam, especially spam behavior. So one of the things we're finding is that folks often discount spam. They think they think that spam, as I said earlier, spam is often a solved problem. But you're seeing this in some ways, spam actually moving back towards phishing, or this intermediary category we're calling mal spam. Where sometimes you actually may see a burst of spam traffic before an actual, say, longlining or phishing campaign begins, and then the phishing campaign itself may actually use attributes from that original campaign. So once again, the idea is that something that was originally blocked as just plain as vanilla spam actually is in many ways a test run for some of these malware campaigns. So it's really, as a trend, I think that's something that really stands out to me because, it shows how things that we often consider solved problems can actually come back. They evolve and they become new tools in attackers' toolkits. So that's something we're still doing research on, collecting a lot of data. That's one of the exciting things about being able to see so much mail traffic is that we actually get a pretty large data set that we can work from. So we're going to be doing more research on that and check out the Threat Insight, Proofpoint Threat Insight blog site for updates. We do try and publish on some of our findings and things that we see. That's something we'll probably be posting out about in the future. But as far as then attacks themselves, I think the other thing is we're seeing a lot more web-based attacks. Once again, because I think URLs are so effective, you see less and less of these large volume campaigns that actually use attachments, and many more of these web-based attacks that fall in between kind of the what you'd call garden variety web compromises and the really much more sophisticated, highly targeted strategic web compromises. It depends on whether you want to call them watering holes, although a lot of folks think of a watering hole as really being very strategic, very targeted, or if there's something in between. So we see cases, for example, where I'm trying to think of a recent. We had a recent example we put in our blog where it was fairly high vol. It was for a set of related sites, and basically once again we detected them because users were receiving legitimate emails that led them to these sites, and they were hitting multiple organizations. We were seeing them across multiple organizations, but at the same time they were not targeted at individual users or at a specific vertical. So I think you are seeing a new category, and what we're seeing at least is some different categories, different ways attackers are using web compromises to really carry out in combination with email and with phishing, users' reliance on email to actually carry out attacks. A lot of exciting stuff going on. Especially, and I think it's interesting seeing how central email is and email security really is as a part of it all.
Great. It looks like we have one last question here, and it's going back to the slide that you had in regard to the Boston City bombings and the other picture that you had over there. I think it was the explosion that was in Texas of the
that was it.
plant. What are some elementary things other than saying don't click on it that you can give to your user base? The question here is to give to your user base to have them prepared to know what is legit and what's not. Is there anything that you would advise as elementary to give them as far as advice other than don't click anything that comes through?
Yeah, no, that's a big one. I mean, we often get this question also related to like social media emails. Social media emails or phishing emails are actually the #1 most effective template, especially LinkedIn invites. So I mean, there's a few things you could do. Obviously, train your users, to not forward emails they receive. I think chain emails, like a lot of those emails like that will also they continue to propagate. They rely on people's behavior and they'll propagate via forwarding. and obviously then try really recommend your users not to click on emails that are coming in from the emails that are coming in that are unsolicited for for videos of big events. If they want to see it, go to a major news site. Typically, it's better. Although those have also been known to be compromised. I know from my personal experience, I also if I really want to view something, I'll view it on my iPhone or my iPad. That's not necessarily an endorsement of iPhone or iOS as inherently more secure, but it has some advantages when it comes to those kinds of sites, viewing certain kinds of emails. But I think typically, once again, just be smart, and then in your environment, really leverage something that allows you to understand when a user, in spite of themselves or in spite of all the training, has clicked on something, allow you to understand when they clicked on that, so that you can actually then follow up and track it down if it turned out to be a bad site, and if it wasn't automatically detected and blocked as malicious. And I think from an IT perspective, in your organizations, a lot of these sites and this malware, we saw one browser-based exploit that it used a 4-year-old iOS vulnerability. iOS 4-year-old Internet Explorer vulnerability. So there's lots of old vulnerabilities out there that are continually being used because they don't get patched. And so, one of the things you can do to help protect your users from themselves is really just patch everything. Make sure that their browsers are up to date, that they actually have the latest versions of not only Internet Explorer but also Java, Java and Flash, because we see actually last year there were more vulnerabilities, I believe it was in Java than in Windows for the first time, I think, that I can remember. So make sure that your systems have all the patches on your company systems. Try and actually do, obviously automate as much of the checking as possible and the patch process as possible. And then, also sometimes even, make your default browser a different browser if necessary. So, so I think, you can protect your users from themselves also by just, some simple best practices when it comes to patching and updating your systems. Disabling JavaScript is also another really good one. That we see a lot of these things that run with malicious JavaScripts, and some really clever, and in many cases, some really clever multi-layer obfuscation for JavaScripting. So if you just disable JavaScript in your browsers, that's another really good way. So once again, you can train the users, but I think what if research and experience has taught us anything, it's that the users are always going to click. Someone will always click. And so how do you protect your users from yourselves, and how do you protect your organization from those users that click? And that's where, once again, things like the ability to know what a user's clicked and when they've clicked it, it really comes into play.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that answer, Patrick, because I think that's something from an iSecure perspective as far as doing the simple things is so key and important. You can have the greatest tools and the greatest sophisticated ways of circumventing security issues, but in the physical security world, I've heard the example of you can have the latest and greatest security system on your house, but if you don't set the code to go have the alarm go off when you're out, it's rendered worthless. You have to do the little things to make sure that the tools and the things that you have in place can work. So that's a great answer that we had there. I believe that was the last question. And I think we'll give the folks 13 minutes back of their day and be able to do that. Again, Patrick, thank you so much. This was a great presentation, greatly appreciated, rich content, and I'm sure everybody got a lot of good information out of that. So I appreciate that very much.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Great. And everybody else, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow for day 4 of the 2014 Information Security Summer Festival, sponsored by iSecure.
Thank you.